I've been playing Xdefiant for more than 90 hours, and I see so many people at level 40, level 50 and beyond doing just basic mistakes. In this video, I am going to tell you about some of the tips and tricks that I picked up along the way. We're going to start with the most basic things and work our way up through some advanced tips, and even cover what I would consider pro tips. These might not make you a better player, but at least you will understand why you keep getting your ass whooped. A few of the basic beginner ones I didn't quite get till 20-30 hours in, so even if you are experienced, I recommend sticking through the whole thing. You might find yourself having a aha moment. Let's get into it. Starting off with our beginner tips, one thing you should really be aware of is the key differences between the different factions. Of course, you have your active skills that are quite easy to pick up, but something that can easily be missed are the passive traits of all the factions. Take for example the Ghosts. They're a great starting faction because they will have an additional 20% more health than the other factions, whereas the Libertad faction, they heal quicker. The Cleaners do incendiary damage, meaning they basically shoot fire rounds. And then you have the DedSec faction that will actually recharge their grenades or proximity mines. It may not seem like it's a huge difference between the factions, but actually when you get into the minutia, or even when you're just starting out, then hey, 20% extra health, it's a big deal. Now, another thing when starting out, it can be really tempting to dive into the daily challenges and just stick to those. But here's the thing with Xdefiant, your level actually doesn't matter. You don't unlock anything with your level. What I recommend instead is that you go into the Ubisoft overlay and you check out which weekly challenges they have ongoing this exact week. These will give you XP for your Ubisoft account, which in turn can give you points that you can buy stuff with. These challenges will also give you weapon boosters or battle pass boosters. And even in some cases, you will get Xdefiant coins for these challenges. These are the coins you use to buy the battle pass or cosmetics. Highly recommended. Ignore the daily challenges and always take care of the weekly Ubisoft challenges first. Also, if you're just starting out, I really recommend you stick to the beginner playlist. One of the major selling points of Xdefiant is that it doesn't have skill-based matchmaking. Now what that means is that players are matched randomly. If you're just starting out, then this can be quite a mouthful because you're basically gonna match against players who have been here all along since the beginning of the game. However, the beginner playlist will actually match you against other players that are all below level 25. Now what this means is that when you start out, you have a chance to actually play against like-minded players, and you're not going to get completely destroyed and run over and demotivated to play the game. Because honestly, we want more players in the game and we don't want you to be demotivated. Now coming up next, you should be aware that every single season, Xdefiant is going to add a new faction. If you're just starting out, none of the extra factions will be unlocked for you. You can go in and you can decide which of the factions you're going to work towards. Now, I'm not going to go over every single faction here, and maybe you're watching this later after Season 2 started, but it's definitely worth looking at the separate factions and finding out which one you find interesting. For myself, I love the DedSec faction, but if you're one of those players who really like to play the objective in the objective modes and sit on the points, then GSK might be for you because they do have great defensive capabilities. Now my final beginner tip is that when running around, and especially in Escort where you will be doing a lot of running, same as in Counter-Strike, you will actually run faster if you have your pistol out and not your main weapon. Now it doesn't matter if it's an SMG or an LMG or a sniper, you always run faster with the pistol. Now mind you, if you're running around with an SMG, you're going to run a little bit faster than if you're running with a heavy weapon like a sniper or a marksman rifle. For running long distances, it can definitely pay to pull out your gun and get that first 30, 40, 50 meters in before you switch back and you're ready to fight. Now moving on to the more advanced tips, let's start with something that was a bit of a surprise for me just having come over from Call of Duty not too long ago. When you unlock attachments, they only unlock on the gun you're using. So assuming you've unlocked all the guns, simply just play with the gun you like. There is no need to this switching back and forth. Find your favorite, level that up, then yes, there will be patches and there will be balance differences, but overall, find a gun you like and level up that gun. It's as simple as that. Another advanced tip, especially for those rounds that can be a bit longer, like escort, or maybe if you're just doing a lot of kills, is that you should know that your ultra will reset if you change your faction mid-game. Meaning, you're playing a round of escort, you're close to the end, you almost have your ultra, which is your character's like superpower that you charge up during the round, and you see the status of that in the middle, in the bottom of the screen. If that is at like, let's say more than 20% or even 30 or 40, you really shouldn't be changing your faction until you have that. Like, depending on which faction you're playing as, that ultra may be the thing that flips the entire game on its head. For example, if you're playing as DedSec and your enemy faction has an ultra coming up that is really powerful, well, the DedSec's ultra is canceling other ultras, meaning that you just wait until they activate their ultra and you basically turn off the thing they thought were going to turn the game around. So that's a great one to keep in your back pocket. And now just a few quick rapid fire advanced tips. If you're playing Hotshot, which is basically kill confirmed, sticking together in pairs of 2 is always a great idea, because not only can you support each other and back each other up, you can catch anyone who's running alone, and you can ensure that you pick up your teammates' tags. If you're playing on a small map or in tight spaces, the shotgun is kind of great. For any other level, I really don't recommend it, because the range can be quite difficult to nail down. Shotguns can be great, but mind you, it has to be the right kind of level. You really don't want to be running around with a shotgun in escort, but if you're on the arena map or the echelon headquarters map, you have a lot of tight spaces, and then the shotgun can be a great option. Other than that, I would stay away from it. If you're looking on your minimap and you're not playing escort, you can always kind of assume where the opponents are going to spawn, because if you look there, you'll see that usually a majority of your teammates are in one direction, then you're gonna be somewhere. If you're not all humbled together, you can expect the enemies to spawn in the opposite direction. Hands down, 99% of the time, that's where they're gonna be. And as you're running around and looking for these enemies, just a few quick tips there as well. You definitely want to turn down the dialogue, and you want to turn down the music in the game. Now, the music here is not as obtrusive as in Call of Duty, but what can be really disturbing is the dialogue from your faction leaders. They just talk way too much whenever you pick up a weapon, whenever you shoot someone, whenever you make a revenge kill, whenever you fart towards the east. There is a guy to tell you about it, and you can miss important audio cues and information, because the directional audio in this game is actually quite good. You just have to be able to hear it. And as you're listening for these enemies, a final advanced tip here is that unless you're a super sweaty player that's level 300, you don't always want to just sprint headfirst into fire. The sprint to fire and the aiming down sight here is a little bit slow in Xdefiant, whereas the TTK, that would be the time to kill, how quick it takes for someone to die, is quite high. So in Xdefiant, whoever is aiming first usually gets the kill. Don't just rush in. And now we're gonna move to the pro tip, but first, a word from our sponsor. It's you! This is a small one-man band YouTube channel about video games, and I'm not even monetized yet. None of this would be possible or even remotely exciting if you weren't watching this video. So thank you so much for supporting the channel. Hit all the buttons below if you want to support a little bit more. You're great. I love you. Thank you so much. All right, so the pro tips. I learned recently that often aiming down sights will shorten reload time significantly. Now, your miles may vary depending on what kind of weapon you have, but I found this especially useful for marksman rifles. Snipers, little bit, not so much, but it really depends on the weapon, and I suggest you experiment with this because there can actually be time saved here. Another great pro tip is that you want to really keep an eye on those high traffic positions. They're essential, especially in escort on defense. People tend to stick to the same routes and some spots when you're playing defense. For example, I will have on the screen for you right now this point in meltdown, in escort or zone control. From this spot, you can actually look directly at the enemy's spawn point. You see 2/3 of all the lanes. And if you're playing as, for example, the Phantoms, and you can put up a shield, you can basically sit up here and pick people off. It's a great spot. All the larger and longer levels are filled with spots like these, and I really encourage you to go look for them because they can be huge and really help defend a spot especially. Now, adversely, if you're on attack, in escort or zone control, quite often you will find that everyone is running down the same direction, and that's the quickest route from A to B. So quite often it actually does pay off to take the long route so you can get behind the enemy. Now that may seem counterintuitive, seeing as you're trying to get the furthest possible, the quickest possible, but if you can get behind the enemy and catch them off guard, you can easily get the upper hand. On top of that, if you are the type to play aggressively, you always want to make sure that you push past the point that your team is trying to get to. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're escorting the payload and you're an aggressive player, you definitely want to go past the payload because the enemy team will be expecting to go to the payload and see the enemies, but you're there between them and the payload. So that will give your team the space they need to push ahead and push the objective or take the objective. Now, another tip that I find really helpful is that you have to be aware that Xdefiant has so many different modes, and all of the modes have a very different pace. For example, if you're playing escort, the respawn time is quite high, and you can sit there and wait for 3 to 4 seconds before getting back in the action. Whereas for Hotshot, you want to rush and you want to push, and you want to play that way more aggressively. So if, like me, you like to change it up between different modes in the same play session, make sure that you adjust the pace you're playing at accordingly. And for our final tip, I have to tell you that EMP grenade is so underrated at Scrimo. Now, I usually prefer to run with the sticky grenade, but if I'm playing against a team that's very skilled, that are great at putting up barriers, using spider bots, using all these other skills in an effective manner, EMP grenade just completely nukes all of that and resets the playing field. They will basically fry everything, and an opponent standing behind a mag barrier who's suddenly naked will be an easy target for the picking. Those were my tips. If any of those were helpful to you or really helped you out or is gonna somehow change your game, hitting that like button will mean the world to me. Thank you so much. Now, in case you want a change of pace and you want to maybe play a single player game that's a bit less sweaty, but still a shooter, then I really recommend Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. Let me tell you about that game in this video right here. Have a good one.